we teach our children, and we want to be able to teach our children that this is a democracy. We want to be able to have them understand what that means, that their voice can make a difference. And Troy does just that. But this is a moment in time where it's been difficult for us to rationalize to our children why someone who's speaking out on behalf of our children, our teachers, and our parents in our community was reassigned at this juncture. We have 2 months left in the school year. We want to keep Troy as long as we can. It didn't make sense to us at the time, and it still doesn't make sense. You'll hear from Troy today about the accusations and what he's been charged with. It is our opinion, in my opinion certainly, that this has been politically motivated, and it is our greatest hope that the principals and the administrators of CPS come together and hire him and elect him as the president of the Chicago Principals and Administrators Association in order that he can continue his good work and continue to be an advocate for us and for our community and for our children. So without further ado, Mr. Troy LaRaviere.
According to the standards used by the mayor's office, there are only 4 schools that consistently and substantially raise student achievement year after year after year. For the past 5 years, I've had the pleasure of leading one of those schools, Blaine Elementary. We have an incredibly simple philosophy for success. Take the things that have been proven to work and do them. Unfortunately, that is not this administration's strategy. Their education policies have been ideologically driven, clumsy, and scientifically baseless. I've talked with so many principals who are deeply troubled by the obstacles this administration puts in their way. Underfunding, a flawed school rating system, a lack of support for schools that serve the most vulnerable children, and a lack of respect for their time, a culture of fear and intimidation, and a burdensome compliance-driven paperwork. The list goes on. Under this administration, teaching, learning, and leading are far more difficult than they have to be. This is a direct result of the fact that this administration is focused on creating financial relationships that ensure that rich donors profit from our students' losses. It is inherently corrupt, and corruption breeds incompetence. Instead of being guided by self-interest, we must see this city as our family and decide that the well-being of everyone in that family has to take precedence, must be the priority. This must be our vision, and we must act to make it so. So I made that decision 3 years ago, that my Chicago family would be my priority. And I based my actions on that decision. Those actions in defense of our family led my colleagues to nominate me for president of the Chicago Principals and Administrators Association. If elected, I made it clear that I would create systems and relationships that would end principals' isolation and bring them together to have a shared voice, to be a shared voice for policies that support our students instead of undermine our students. When I was a lone voice, the administration tolerated it. But when faced with the prospect of an organized group of education leaders speaking as one on behalf of our students, they moved with haste and reckless abandon to prevent that from happening. I've already written about this administration's removal or attempt to remove me before. Today I'm here to respond to the politically motivated charges that they've assembled as a false justification for that removal. When I read the charges, I had the distinct feeling that the mayor's office was projecting. That's when you attribute your own shortcomings to someone else. The broad categories of the charges are insubordination, ethics violations, which were all connected to my support for Bernie Sanders and Chuy Garcia, and dereliction of duty. Each one of those charges has subcharges, some of which are very vague and others a little specific. The charges under insubordination have to do with my support for my teachers, my opposition to park testing, and speaking out against corruption. I spoke out in part to meet my professional obligation to speak. I spoke out because the National Policy Board for Educational Administration sets professional standards for principals. And one of those standards states, and I quote, "Principals must act to influence local, district, state, and national decisions that affect student learning." In other words, public advocacy doesn't distract us from our professional responsibilities. Public advocacy is our professional responsibility. I also speak out as a veteran who put my life in harm's way to defend our freedom of speech rights. I resolved that there was no way I was going to go 5,000 miles away to defend those rights against the likes of some foreign dictator, only to return to my own country and have to submit those rights to the likes of a municipal elected official. The best way to protect your rights is to exercise them. So that's what I did. I spoke out. In May of 2014, I was the first and only active CPS employee to publicly question a $20 million contract for a company called Soups Academy. And last July, I questioned this administration's own corrupt and reckless fiscal management. And once again, I cited the Soups contract. In response, the mayor's hand-picked Board of Education issued a warning resolution against me that served as a prelude for their current attempts to fire me. Right after I received that warning resolution, Barbara Byrd Bennett was indicted and later convicted for her role in the Soups scandal. That very scandal, they punished me for criticizing. If you value responsible management of tax dollars, you're supposed to commend the people who identify waste and fraud, not punish them. But punish me they did. In fact, one of the things that got lost in our attempt to get the mayor to release the Laquan McDonald emails is the fact that they still refuse to release the mayor's office emails that are connected with the Barbara Byrd Bennett Soups scandal. So when you leave me today, I respectfully suggest you stop by City Hall and remind the mayor that he owes you something. And remind him repeatedly. Another one of the charges was dereliction of duty. They charged me with not completing my REACH teacher evaluation ratings. They're right. I've never completed the REACH ratings. And that is the reason our school is so successful. REACH is based on a framework created by Charlotte Danielson for teacher observation. It is noteworthy that the most prominent critic of REACH is none other than Charlotte Danielson herself. She says that the vast majority of teachers need to focus on professional development. In other words, we need to replace our emphasis on rating with an emphasis on learning, because one creates more effective teachers and the other does not. REACH is extremely time consuming. It takes up more time than anything else principals do. So I asked my boss what the consequences would be if I didn't finish my REACH ratings. He said I'd get a lower score on my personal evaluation. I told him I was fine with getting a decrease in the evaluation of my performance if it meant I could make the time to do the things that would increase my students' performance. And so that's what I did. And it worked. So for the past 3 years, I've accepted the lower evaluation without complaint. But somehow this year, now that I'm running for president of the Principals Association and speaking out, the penalty is somehow jumped from a lower evaluation to termination without any warning or notice. The more important point, however, is that this system is so backward that they put principals in a position to have to decide between doing what's good for their own personal evaluation or doing what's good for students. No educator should ever be put in that position. but it happens all the time in CPS under this administration. Other charges have to do with how I use my time and CPS resources, but they don't mention anything specific. What I do know is that when you get the kind of results that we got at Blaine, you don't get those results without spending a massive amount of time on the business of teaching and learning. And that's certainly what I've done at Blaine. But when I thought about this administration's focus on how I spend my time, it brought to mind a February 2015 Chicago Tribune analysis of how the mayor spends his time. They found that in 2013 and 2014, he had over 376 meetings and appearances with his campaign donors. That means that well over half of his days were spent catering to the greed of his campaign contributors instead of tending to the needs of Chicago's residents, neighborhoods, and schools. In other words, he was derelict in his duty to everyday Chicagoans. In the final analysis, the best indicator for how I've spent my time is the results I've gotten for Blaine. And similarly, the best indicator for how City Hall and the mayor's office spends its time is the lack of results they've gotten for our neighborhoods, our residents, and our schools. Another one of the charges is related to a routine audit of our internal accounts. The only specific thing they mention is a late report. Anything else is likely a minor violation, like a teacher not completing a payee list for a student field trip. What's important to note is that before I arrived at Blaine's audit came back unsatisfactory. I'd inherited one of the most poorly managed internal accounts in all of CPS. But each year we made improvements, and there's never been an unsatisfactory audit under my leadership. In other words, unlike this administration, I took control of an institution whose financial accounts were in shambles, and I have a continuous record of improvement. It's not perfect, but it's in better shape than it was when we inherited. The mayor's office, however, took control of a city that had a bond rating of AA- as recently as 2010 before he came in office. And after 5 years of mismanagement, we all know that bond rating is now junk status. While my fiscal record has been one of enhancements and improvements, this administration's record has been one of regression and failure. Like nearly every school in our district, Blaine has been cited for minor paperwork issues before. But I've never had any discipline or any threats of discipline. But somehow now that I'm speaking out and running for the Principals Association, it's being elevated to grounds for termination. And even more important is that there has never been an audit finding under my watch that a single dime has ever been spent on some place or someone that it should not have gone to. Unfortunately, we cannot say the same for CPS under this administration. I'm going to end with a note of thanks. Even under my current circumstances, I am more hopeful than ever. The life that I've lived and the path that I've taken gives me no other option than to be hopeful. Thank you to everyone who has supported me, and in particular the entire Blaine Elementary School community. The Blaine community is a central part of the events of my life that make me so incredibly hopeful. You see, my mother, who has passed on, was white. And more than 50 years ago, she was banished from her family in her North Side neighborhood because of the color of her firstborn son, my brother, Michael. I remember the pain in my mother's voice as she told us how she was banished from her family and from her neighborhood. And for my mother now to see this North Side community bring me in and give me one of the most important responsibilities you can give someone, the responsibility over the education and safety of their children. And to see this today, so many of them coming together to rally for me, to rally for her son, to support him with signs and chants of "Stand for Troy." I would give anything and everything I own to bring her back for just one moment to see this. Our family story, from Mom to Michael to me, was impossible. And yet it happened. Right here in our city. I lived that life. And you can't live that life and be cynical. You can't live that life and not believe that Chicago can overcome the corruption that plagues our government and debilitates our school system. You can't live that life and not have faith in Chicago and its people. So we have to make an ethical decision about the kind of community we want to be, because corruption and incompetence have consequences. They're not these vague ideas that we just have to get used to. Just part of the way of doing things. Corruption robs us of the resources that we need to help students realize their full potential as human beings. Incompetence steals from us the time that it takes to ensure those students develop the knowledge and the skills and the civic disposition necessary to make a better life for themselves, a better life for their family, and a better life for their communities. Corruption steals that from them, and in doing so, it steals them from us. But like I said, I have faith in Chicago. I know we can do better. This administration's effort to keep principals isolated only serves to affirm for me the power of our collective voice and unified action. So as I move forward, I'm more determined than ever, not only to unite education leaders across our schools, but to unite those leaders with parents, community members, and organizations across our city who want to do right by our children. And I know that if tens of thousands of Chicagoans stand with us, we will be victorious, and we will create the city we deserve. Thank you.